Have you ever wondered how tree peonies are produced? Most commercial peonies are produced using a very special type of graft. In this video, I'm going to explain what that graft is, show you how to do it, and then I'll show you the results after about 1.5 years. Herbaceous peonies are pretty easy to divide. You can just dig up the whole clump and split it in a few different sections. And I've made a separate video to show you how to do that. Tree peonies are a little different. They're more like shrubs. And you probably know that taking a shrub and trying to split it in half is a little more difficult. And it doesn't work nearly so well with tree peonies. Now, once the plant is large enough, you can dig it up and have a look at the root system. And as long as you can get several growths above ground connecting with their own root system, you can split it. But the plant has to be a certain age before that will work well. And you usually only get a couple pieces of that tree peony. Commercially, that's almost never done. Commercial producers of tree peonies always use a grafting technique. It allows them to take one bush and create a lot of different plants. When you go and buy a tree peony, it usually comes in a pot and it looks like any other shrub. But underneath the soil level is a surprise that most gardeners don't know about. That tree peony is not growing on its own roots. In most cases, it's growing on something called a nurse root. And that nurse root is a herbaceous peony. What growers do is they take a herbaceous peony root and graft the buds from a tree peony onto it. Then they grow that for a couple years until it's large enough to sell, and that's what you get in that pot of a tree peony. Many times that tree peony has no roots of its own. It relies entirely on this graft underneath. Now over time, that tree peony will make its own roots, and the herbaceous peony root will slowly shrivel up and die. Now this sounds like a very complicated technique, but it's actually one that any gardener could do. And I hope that after this video, you'll have the confidence to do it yourself. Now the best time to do grafting is in early fall. The tree peonies are making next year's buds in late August. And once those buds are fully developed, you can graft them. So most grafting of tree peonies is done in late August, throughout September, and even in the early part of October. Now let's have a closer look at what you need to do this grafting. The top part of the graft is called a scion, and it's going to contain the buds from this peony. I've gone in the garden and looked at some of my tree peonies and cut off some top pieces where I have a couple buds on each stem. You can see the leaves are starting to go. It's fall here, and we're going to cut all of these off. We're only interested in this section here, but we do want some healthy buds for the graft. For the bottom part of the graft, we need some herbaceous roots. And I've got some right here. So how did I get these? Well, yesterday I dug up one of my herbaceous peonies, and once all the roots were exposed, I simply cut off some roots from them. Now, I want the root fairly thick. You want it about as thick as your finger or even thicker. This is okay. This is a nice size root. I cut the top flat and I cut the bottom on an angle. That way I know which way's up. It's really important you graft on the right end. If you get this turned upside down and graft at this end, the plant won't grow. By keeping this slanted, it looks like a shovel to me. And I know a shovel always goes with the pointed end down. And that's how I remember it. Once I've got these cut, I put them in some 10% bleach. And I left them in there for about an hour. That gets rid of some of the dirt on here, kills the bacteria, and sterilizes this root to some extent. The root also gets nice and clean, and you get this white color. Before you bleach it, it's more like this color here, and after you bleach it, it's nice and white. I then put these in the fridge overnight to get ready for the grafting. It's a good idea to wait about 12 to 24 hours after you take these roots. These roots are called nurse roots because they're going to nurse the buds into becoming a full plant. You're going to need a nice sharp knife for this. but you don't really need a pruning knife. A sharp utility knife like this with a fresh blade is all you really need. We're going to trim this up and get the scion ready for the grafting. We don't want any of this top part. This is the top bud. We're going to cut it just above that. We're also going to get rid of all of these leaves. So this is the piece we're going to use for the scion. It's best if you get it from the garden and use it right away. But you can put this in a plastic bag and store it in the fridge for a couple weeks and still use it. Ideally, you have one terminal bud and a secondary bud. So having two buds is a good idea. This piece actually has three, so I'm going to get rid of this lower one here. When you make a graft, there are various types of grafts that describe the shape of the scion as it joins the root part. But I think for a beginner, the easiest one is the cleft graft. And for that, we're going to make two cuts on this. Now this does take some practice. If you haven't done this before, get some extra pieces of wood from your peony and just practice. What you want to do is make one cut. You don't want to do several little cuts. It's one smooth cut. We're going to start about here, head towards the bottom, going deeper and deeper, and making one nice flat cut. Like that. Then we're going to turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. Ideally, when you're finished, you have a nice V cut like this, where the tip is nice and narrow. Now, in this cut, I didn't cut deep enough, so I'm going to recut one side and go a little deeper. Now, I can cut this off and do another practice run. That time I cut a little too deep. We don't want that either. So after you've done a few practice runs and you're ready to do the real bud, give it a try. I want that a little narrower at the bottom. A little narrower still. There we go. That's nice and narrow. Now we have to get the nurse root ready. And I'm going to cut this off one more time here. So now we have a nice flat top, and we want to make one cut through the middle. Now the depth of this cut, we want to match the cleft here so that the two match up like this. So I need to go a little deeper here. Simply slide your scion into the cleft you made in the root. I'm going to go a little deeper still. Now what's important is that the edge of the wood, this part right here, matches up to the edge of the root. You don't want this in the middle. You want it off to the side so the two sides match. That's where the cambium layer is. And now you can see why we call this a cleft graft. You make a cleft shaped hole in your rootstock. The next thing you have to do is tie this down. Now you can use regular string for that. You can use an elastic band, the type you might find in an office, or you can use special grafting material. But it's really not needed. Any kind of stretchy material works. You want to wrap this around, stretching it as you go. To tie it in, you just make a little loop and push it through, and the stretchy elastic will hold it. Now we can put a second one on there. Check to see that the scion is still in the right position. And that's your graft. So I've made several grafts here. Once you've got them finished, check them again to make sure that they're lined up correctly. If you don't line up the edge of the scion with the edge of the root, it won't take. Be very careful that you've got this lined up really well. And you can see my scion is much smaller than my root, so I've positioned it over on one side. This other side that has the gap, that's okay, that'll just dry out. But check each one, make sure there's good contact. Once you're happy with your grafts, you need to condition them for a couple weeks, anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. That will allow the healing to take place, and those two pieces will join together. Now what some people will do is now wrap this with special tape, and you could use saran wrap for that, but I use a slightly different method so you don't have to wrap these. What I do is get a wet paper towel, rinse out the excess water. You just want it moist. Put that in one of these baggies and place your cuttings inside. That will provide enough moisture to allow these to heal. Seal it up. You want to put this into a fairly warm spot, so somewhere around 75 to 80 degrees works well. That higher temperature will help these heal faster. So put them away for a couple weeks, and then it'll be time to plant them out. Now that we have the grafts made, it's time to bury them in the ground. Dig a hole that's deep enough so that when the graft is buried, it's going to be 2 to 3 inches below the soil level. The soil will protect the graft during the winter, and the depth will help the roots grow on the tree peony as opposed to the herbaceous peony. We really don't want any new growth on the herbaceous peony part. This experiment was started in October of 2020, and it's now May 2022. The grafted plants were outside over the winter and all of the following summer. They did show some growth in the summer of 2021, but they didn't do a whole lot, so I just left them in the ground. It's now spring 2022, and one of them is showing some very strong growth. It's time to dig it up and have a look at what's going on underground. I planted several of these grafted tree peonies along this row, and this is the only one that's growing properly. I dug one of them up, and this is the old root I had used, but there's no growth, and the piece that I'd put in as the graft is completely rotted, so that's garbage. But this one looks quite good, and I'd like to see what it looks like. Well, there we are. It actually looks quite good. Let's go have a closer look. This is the old root. The graft is up here. Now this piece was a tree peony, and this piece was in a herbaceous peony, and the top part of the herbaceous peony has rotted away. but you can see a whole bunch of roots coming. And the roots are coming out of the tree peony part. There might also be roots coming from the lower part. And just so you know, if you ever do this yourself, don't dig it up like this. Just leave it in the ground for another couple of years. I'm only doing it to show you what's going on here. It's got a really nice root system. And most of the roots seem to be coming from the tree peony part. There's a new side shoot coming here. Another new shoot here, and of course we have the top growth. So this looks like a really healthy tree peony. Another 2 years and it should be flowering. Now before I dug this up, I was pretty sure it was growing well because you can tell by looking at the leaves that this part is a tree peony. If I had seen the leaves from a herbaceous peony, I would have suspected new growth from down here, which is not what I want. So if the graft fails, it's possible that the root grows and makes a new growth from the lower part, which is not what we want. So I was pretty sure that this graft had taken. Now, how do you tell the difference between a tree peony and a herbaceous peony? By looking at the leaves. Here's a close-up of the two plants, and you can easily see the difference. I hope you found this to be an exciting project, and I hope you'll give it a try. It does have a number of steps, but it's not that difficult to do. If you want to learn more about growing peonies, I have a whole set of peony videos, and I'll put a link to those in the top right-hand corner. See you in the garden.